Today's podcast is being sponsored by a project that we at PowerMonkey have been working on for a while and are incredibly excited about. If you've ever wanted to attend PowerMonkey Camp with some of the world's best athletes and coaches, here is your chance. On January 1st, we're bringing PowerMonkey Camp to your living room with PowerMonkey Camp Online. Online campers have access to over 22 hours of station lectures featuring our elite coaching roster of Olympians, national champions, world record holders in their respective fields. This course is for everyone, beginners, seasoned athletes, coaches, and even fitness enthusiasts. We're offering you an incredible opportunity to learn from some of the top coaches in gymnastics, Olympic weightlifting, aerobic capacity, rowing, jump rope, kettlebell training, as well as doing some lectures on programming methodologies, nutrition, injury prevention, and even on mindset training. Additionally, PowerMonkey Camp Online will provide continuing education credits for NASM, AFAA, CrossFit, and others, and serve as your first step in becoming a PowerMonkey Fitness Master Trainer. Registration is open now, but will close at the end of February. Go to academy.powermonkeyfitness.com to find out more. Hey everyone, welcome to another PowerMonkey podcast. On today's episode, it's just going to be Chad and I. All we're going to be talking about is another movement episode, and Chad is going to be taking the lead on this one, and we're going to be going over some easily applied tips with regards to the snatch. We've talked about the clean and jerk before. There are some overlaps into what we're going to be talking about here, but Chad takes the lead. I think it's a really great discussion in terms of not only simple things that you can apply to your snatch training, but also how things transfer over to Olympic weightlifting movements other than the snatch, but also things like gymnastics movements and other skills you might be learning outside of just gymnastics and weightlifting. Chad obviously knows this stuff inside and out. Hopefully we get some good points over to you guys that you can apply to your training. Enjoy. All right, what's up, Chad? How you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Just making it through the last part of this year and looking forward to 2021 like many of us are, I think.
Absolutely. Well, it's just me and you today. I always enjoy these episodes where we start talking about some movements. We've done a few. I think we could probably do hundreds more of these.
Right.
I think both of us just like talking about our own specific sport, so it's nice to be able to have a chance to break down today. You got the microphone, so we're going to be breaking down some helpful tips with regards to snatch. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, we're going to dig into the snatch, and like you said, it's a little bit, I mean, it's always exciting to do one of these, but it's a little bit scary for both of us, I think, because we can, go off on tangents and everything else. It's kind of hard to stay under control, and get to the point.
When we were talking about doing this episode, I was like, is an hour, are we going to have enough or to discuss in an hour with, one topic like this? And I think I don't even know why I said it. It kind of like came out. I was like, all right, well, we could do days talking about a specific topic. You give me handstands, I could talk about it for weeks at a time. So I don't think we're going to have any stopping of conversation with regards to a movement like a snatch.
Not at all. And especially because if we talk about the snatch as a whole or the handstand as a whole, there are, so many different little pieces to that. And even if we just take one piece, which maybe we should do at some point, and just talk the whole episode about one little specific position and piece, we could certainly dig into that. But what we wanted to do today is just give some of my easily applied tips for the snatch.
But before we get into the snatch, since we already did a clean episode, it might be good to just review some of the things that we talked about there. And since a lot of those kind of apply to the snatch in and of itself, can we go over some of the faults that we discussed with the clean really quickly, and then we'll slowly start to hit the bullets when it comes to the snatch?
Yeah, that'll be a great lead in, because we did the clean episode and that was more about common faults that I see, how to identify them and just some recommendations on how to address them. But what I noted in there and what I want to renote here is that everything I talked about there applies to the snatch as well. Those are the common faults that I see in the snatch too. And everything that I'm talking about here for the snatch, these easily applied tips, you can apply these within the clean as well, and also the jerk, probably in a little bit of a different way, but the basic concepts are going to be the same.
Well, do you want to mention those faults really quickly, just so people have kind of a refresher? And all listeners out there, that episode is still available. You can get in a little bit more in depth and go back to that episode, but really quickly, can you just give those three faults?
Yeah, absolutely. And I highly recommend, as you did, Dave, to go back and listen to that. And specifically now that we're getting this Snatch episode out, to listen to both of them and listen to both of them, back to back if you want, but, sometime within a similar time frame, both episodes maybe in 1 or 2 weeks time, so that they're going to kind of build on each other and really work together nicely. And the thing about the tips that I'm going to give you, they're going to be recommendations that are going to help you hold these faults off, to help you change these faults, and to really maintain your movement. An example of that is, I'll give these these recommendations to someone that's a beginner, but I also still use them to this day in my own training, and once again, easily applied tips. But those faults that we talked about specifically in the clean are losing tension or position from the floor. So talking about, as soon as you initiate out of your start position, you start to lift the weight up. In many cases, athletes will lose, either their back will either round a little bit, and or maybe those hips shoot up through those first couple inches. So we kind of dug into that. And once again, that's so common to see in the Snatch as well, and critical that you fix that. The toes lifting in the middle of the pull, so very common right now. One of the major faults for sure that I was seeing at that time, which was, I think, back in May, and of course still to this day. So toes lifting in the middle of the lift, and what that does is it when you lose connection with the ground, you're not using as much of your body as you could be. You're not centered, you're not balanced, and it really throws the rest of the lift off from that point. And then in the clean, also low or no contact. Talking about contact specifically in the upper quad for the clean. If we relate that to the Snatch, we want it to be more right in the middle of the pubic bone, and more so than athletes contacting low as they would in the clean. They either just they usually just don't contact at all in the Snatch if that's missing, or their grip is off. And we talked about making sure that you check your grip in the clean to accommodate the best contact point that you can there. And that's something that you're going to want to do for the Snatch as well, because if your grip is too narrow, for example, one of the things we talked about in the clean is you're going to have an early arm bend that's going to contribute to an early arm bend and or shoulder shrug to muscle it up to that specific position. So once again, just reinforcing that those are critical faults, concepts that need to be addressed in the Snatch as well.
All right, that's great info, and I won't dig too much into that since we already went over it in the other episode, but I do think that those are all things, like you said, transfer back and forth between both of the movements. But since today's episode is specifically about the Snatch, let's go ahead and dive into some of these common things that you like to see in terms of ways to fix potential issues. First one that you have written out here is holding of the setup position. Can you dive into this a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really one of the aspects of the lift that I spend so much time on, and rightfully so, because it's something that people rush in and out of. And we talked in detail about start position on the clean recording as well, so I won't dig into the specifics of that too much, but understand the reason why we dug into it with the clean is because any fault that you see in the lift beyond the start position is potentially, the root of that is the start position. It's off, or it's lacking in some way, or you're just rushing it too much. So a common theme with all of this stuff that I want to talk about when it comes to faults, a common theme that we talk about so much, Dave, is just trying to get people to slow down. Slow down means many different things to us. It means slow down your thinking a little bit, slow down your journey and the process as a whole. Don't try to get that muscle up, for example, before you're even strong in the ring dip, all that kind of thing. But also just generally slowing down your movement, getting your setup process, getting into that setup, holding that setup, easing slowing your movement down from that setup, going into the rest of the lift. And again, I want you to think about slowing down specifically means all these different things. I'm not just talking about slowing down your movement. I'm talking about slowing down the whole process, the setup process, and easing into it. And, pretty much all of these easily applied tips that I'm going to give you have to do with ways that I've felt I've had to come up with as a teacher or a coach to at least trick you into slowing down to the extent that you need to. And I was just reminded of this earlier, Dave. I was watching videos on one of my athletes that's relatively new to working with me. and relatively new. Okay, maybe it's been 6 months, but that's a great example that it's been 6 months and I'm still, mostly what I'm saying to them is I still need you to slow down more. I'm giving reminders and I'm saying slow down in different ways because, you know, what you need to understand and what that athlete needs to understand is that this is a basic concept that we can't really move beyond until you slow down to the extent that I need to. And I'm not saying that you have to forever be annoyingly slow, in your movement as you initiate from a start position, but we've got to get it uh, slow enough to help us make change, to help you learn, to help you do all these things that we want you to do so that we can move into other aspects of the lift and so that we can build potentially on that speed down the road at some point. So it's such a common theme and a base recommendation that I know you give so much to as well. And I want to spend just a moment, Dave, and ask you, because this is relatable to any movement, what is maybe the most common trick that you use to slow people down?
Yeah, so when it comes back, I had a couple questions for you on this, and just the slowing down component comes back to something I think we talk about all the time, this idea of, using more pause and tempo work with skill building and giving the person the ability to do things slowly before they expect to be able to do them with speed or with dynamic action or with kipping in the gymnastics world, things like that. You have to understand kind of where your body is within space and time. So what do I use when I'm trying to slow people down? Well, one of them is, like we just mentioned, a lot more pause and tempo work where you're actually holding positions. And this is kind of part two of that hierarchy that we have in the power monkey gymnastics side of things. Is static holds and controlled movement is how we build positional awareness. So we'll do a lot of hold at peak positions in our pull, a lot of hold positions in the bottom part of our dip. We'll do a lot of hold positions with our handstands, using the wall, taking the stability out of it so we can really understand what position is supposed to look like. So for me, I think it falls in line exactly what we were talking about the importance of using pause and tempo work a lot. Now, in regards to what you're talking about here with the setup position, this is something that really shouldn't be very fatiguing. I mean, the bar is still down on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about just understanding what mechanically is happening
Mm-hmm.
and positionally is happening before anything actually goes on with the actual first pull of the lift. Now, my question to you is, what does your setup look like with regards to this actual hold, right? This setup for the snatch. What are you looking for in terms of hand position, in terms of where your hips are in relation to maybe where the hips are on the clean? Is it different? Are there some similarities between the clean and the snatch setup? Can you give us a little bit of breakdown in terms of what you're actually looking with this hold in the setup?
Yeah, absolutely. We can cover that, and it's a great comparison between the snatch and the clean. One of the things I talked about last time, and again reinforced here, is that everything we talked about with the clean, the same things are usually going on in the snatch. And I like to say that the snatch and clean start position are far more similar than they are different. There are some obvious differences there. And before I dig into that, a few other things that I want to reinforce with all these tips, because it's going to be common to all these tips. We need 100% presence and awareness within each of them. For example, if I'm telling you to hold a position, I'm telling you to hold this setup position, I need you to, one, pay attention to what you're doing, and slowing down, again, that basic concept is going to help you do that. It's going to give you an opportunity to be more aware, to be more present, and to feel and focus on the things that you need to be feeling and focusing on in that setup position first, but also moving from that setup position.
Mm-hmm.
We're also going to use these tips to help you learn how to focus better. We're going to use these tips to isolate certain areas through each lift or through the snatch specifically. But again, you can use these concepts in the clean and the jerk as well. But we're going to use these tips to isolate different areas of the lift to help you learn to focus through those specific areas, and then to be able to better put them together. So we'll reinforce that as we go here. As far as a comparison of snatch and clean setup, one of the things I mentioned in the clean is that I could talk about start position, Dave, like I said in the beginning, for 2 hours easily, and, cover at least 10 different points that I want to see and try to perfect within the snatch, the clean, and the jerk, and we're not going to do that. And what I've found through the years is that for most people, if I can get them to implement three, I'm trying to gather my words here, pillars. I'll call them the three pillars of start position, and it has to do with whether you're snatching or cleaning. One is being centered on your foot. So a lot of athletes are heel heavy. I don't very often see someone too far on their toes. It's one of the common complaints or reasons that I get from coaches that say heels a lot is they say they're trying to keep athletes from being too far on their toes. And that just doesn't make any sense to me, because yes, I want to be able to say heels if I need to for that 1 out of 1,000 people or more that need to hear it. But in general, I just don't see people too far on their toes. I see
Can I
them
mention
more.
something about that really quickly?
Yeah, for sure.
It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of the cues that come along with sitting back on your heels have to do with knee position over the toes, where you've had a lot of people, trying to avoid that knee position from drifting too far in front of the foot, and sitting back would allow for a little bit more of a stacked knee over the foot, maybe a better back position there. And I know that you and Dan, we've had some conversation. Dan Pope, our PTs, have discussions about knee position over the foot, and what's really okay with regards to how far that knee drifting in front of the toe is okay. And just kind of curious as to whether or not you view sitting back on the heels as a cue to avoid the knee from drifting too far in front of the toes.
Yes, that's one of the many reasons why coaches will say that to athletes. And when I talk about the three pillars, what I want people to understand, and I'm kind of in the middle of writing about this right now, Dave, so it's kind of fresh on my mind, and I probably have too much to say about it. But what I want people to understand is that I'm indicating these are three pillars for everyone. A lot of coaches and athletes in the community are going to just preach individualization. And yes, that's true to an extent. But what happens is that I feel like these coaches out there are trying to zone in on the things that need to be individualized, and they're missing some of the basic concepts. And so what I'm saying is that these three pillars, I feel like, are the same across the board for everyone. And the byproduct of these three pillars are a lot of other things that people are trying to reposition and perfect. And knees being in front of the toes, for example, that is one of them. So where should the knee be in relation to the toes in regards to how far back or how far forward it is? Well, it's really simply, it is going to be different for different people. That is something that should be individualized, but not on the point itself. So I'm not going to try to adjust your shin angle necessarily. I can, but it's all about perfecting the three pillars and not about specifically perfecting the shin angle. For example, or how far forward the knee is or how far back the knee is. It is simply a byproduct of the combination of the three pillars that I'm talking about.
Right. So that's more of the symptom. But I was also bringing it up with regard to the fact that it's less of an issue than I think people are making it out to be sometimes. That knee drifting in front of the toe is actually okay for, and you'll see a lot of lifters have a severe shin angle from, shin ankle angle. And it's part of what you are capable as an athlete, how mobile you are in that position, how comfortable you are there. And you see a lot of athletes actually perform incredibly challenging lifts with a very severe angle there. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing, and the point that I try to get across in my content is that, to an extent, don't even worry about it, because if you're applying these other three characteristics, it's that byproduct. The only reason I would say to worry about it is if you are not mobile enough in your ankle to get to be able to apply the combination of the three pillars. And that's not like extremely common, because I have a few athletes that I work with that are very tight in the ankle, and they can still give me enough of a shin angle to apply the other three pillars. But every now and then I'll come across someone where we need to say, okay, we are worried about this because we need to work on your ankle mobility and improve that as we go as much as we can, so that you can create more of a shin angle, and them creating more of a shin angle are going to assist in applying the three pillars. But it's important, when talking about these three pillars, that you know that they work together. So changing one means that you're going to have to adjust one of the other ones to either compensate for that or to go along with that.
Right.
So on top of that midfoot pressure that we're talking about, or tripod foot, if that's a term that you understand and use, I need the bar to be touching the shins. All these are debatable, and bar touching the shins in particular, I have athletes ask me about that a lot when I say I want the bar touching the shins, and there's a lot of conflicting, debatable information about that one specifically. But understand that these three pillars and anything else that I teach, I'm really taking from what I see 99 point something % of the best in the world doing. And one of the common reasons that people give me for the bar, setting the bar away from the shins, maybe that's 1 inch. I've heard athletes and coaches say that they want it 7 or 8 inches from the shin, and that just makes zero sense to me. But I'll try to wrap this up quickly because I could say too much about it. But one of the reasons that they give is that I'm tall, so I need the bar to start away from my shins. So what I did not too long ago, as I was writing that segment of the book, is I went and I looked at, I tried to find the tallest weightlifters that I could on hook grip to look at and just really observe and confirm what I was trying to teach. And the tallest one I could find was 6'6", and he's actually the reigning world and Olympic champion, arguably at this point in time, one of the best super heavyweights of all time, if not the best super heavyweight of all time. I'm not even going to try to say his last name, Dave, but his first name is Lasha. And what he does is the bar is, maybe 6 or 8 inches away from his body, and he's kind of sitting in the bottom of the squat, but then he slowly rolls it back. And as soon as the bar comes in contact with his shins, that is his cue to lift. So just using that as an example of this athlete that is one of the best of all times, 6'6", is lifting with the bar touching his shins. And if I find another elite lifter that is, say, a female in the smallest weight class with different limb length proportions, different body type, is also lifting with the bar touching the shins in the start position, we should give a lot of validity to that specific aspect. And again, every 99.99% of the other elites in between that, I see doing the same thing. So I'll kind of leave it at that, but don't tell me that you're setting up with the bar away from your shins, 3 inches, whatever it is, simply because you're tall. It's just not, it's not a good enough reason from my perspective when you think about these completely different body types and limb length proportions on the elite level doing the same thing. And another thing that they do in combination with that, the third pillar, is they're setting up with the shoulders directly on top of the bar. And specifically what that means is, what does shoulders on top of the bar mean? Well, if we divide the deltoid into 3, we have the front delt, we have the rear delt, and we have the front delt, middle delt, and the rear delt. And they're setting the bar in line with the rear delt. So that back third of the shoulder is where they are. And again, I've looked at as many videos as I can find that are directly from the side and line that up. And again, 99% of what I've seen so far, this is where my shoulders are. I was never told to put my rear delt directly in line with the bar. It's just something that happened. And I think for a lot of athletes, it's just something that happens because it creates strong angles in the body, especially when it's applied with midfoot bar touching. The angles that you specifically need. So again, there is an individualized different back angle for each person. Absolutely. There are, again, different limb length proportions, different body types out there, but it's only a byproduct of these 3. Your femur angle is only a byproduct of those 3 pillars. So if you'll think about applying that, now let's go back. I've probably talked too long here, but let's go back to the comparison between the snatch and the clean. If you apply those 3 pillars within the snatch, just like I recommend that you do in the clean, that is going to put you in the snatch start position that you need, or very close to it. Yes, there are some other basic characteristics that I want to make sure of, but the thing that I've found in this community, Dave, is that most athletes are already doing those on their own. They just may be slightly out of position or away from those 3 pillars. And so when I get them to apply these 3 pillars, I don't have to say anything else because they're already doing the other ones.
Right. So it seems like pillar 2 and 3 kind of play off of each other, because if the
Yeah.
bar is set too far away from the shin, then the shoulder is going to be behind the bar. If the bar is right up against the shin, it's going to put you much more in that position where the rear delt is basically on top of the bar. So basically, pillar 2 sets you up for pillar 3. Is that correct?
It absolutely, and pillar 1 sets you up for pillar 2 as
Right.
well. You know, if you're too far on your heels, that's going to mean that your shins are further back than I would
Right.
want them to be. So you pull the bar all the way to your shin, the bar is going to be too far back. You know, and that's another thing, is that there is some variation in regards to where the bar should be on your foot, so slight variation. But again, it's a byproduct of the other 3. So
it's not just pillar 1, 2, 3. It's also specifically in that order. Let's start at pillar 1. Let's make sure that's in place. That'll set up pillar 2. That'll set up pillar 3.
Absolutely, and those other characteristics that are also important. Again, this long list of specifics that I want to see. A couple examples that are whether you're cleaning or snatching, I want the knees to be flared out to touching your arms. So obviously in the snatch, your knees should be out further because your hands are wider. Another one is I want your head and eyes kind of straight ahead, and that can vary slightly depending on what the athlete is doing. But in general, the head and eyes up. I want the arms to be twisted in. So more of an extreme internally rotated position just sets you up to use your arms better. Turns your lats on as well. So just a few examples there, and hopefully I'll be done with those blogs here pretty soon, so we can point them to that as well.
It's interesting that there's an internal rotation that happens through the shoulder. It seems like it pulls the bar into you a little bit closer too if you're doing that. Is that right?
Well, it sets you up to be able to do that, because if your arm is twisted completely in the other direction, and I want you to think about what we don't want is you tightening a bottle cap with your right hand and loosening one with your left hand. So that's the twisting out of both arms and hands that we don't want. But if you're in that extreme position, your lats are more turned off. You're not going to be able to use them to push back on the bar as much as you need to. It's the same thing as if your arms are twisted in with the bar overhead. Your lats are going to be turned off and not engaged as much and able to assist holding that overhead position. So we need to go from this internal rotation, this internal twist in the pull, to external twist overhead when you're pulling overhead, and in the front rack, external twist in the shoulder or in the arms when you're getting into the front rack as well. Right. So internal to external, and a lot of athletes we see doing the opposite. So they go from more of either slightly or extremely twisted out to then twisted in with the bar overhead or in the front rack, and it causes a lot of issues, turns a lot of your body off, or leaves a lot of solid engagement that you could be using off the table.
This is interesting stuff, Chad. We're half an hour in already, and we're on point 1. We're kicking ass right now. We're doing good.
I know we are not doing a good job at all, but it really sets up nicely to what the first easily applied tip needs to be. And I wanted to define real quick before I dig into that, what does easily applied mean? And what that means is that I'm trying to give you these tips that you can apply just within your regular routine, within your regular programming. You don't have to change your programming. You don't have to at any time, really. I'm just saying, okay, on these sets and reps, I want you to do these certain things. Or anytime you do this exercise, I want you to do this certain things. Or in between some of your sets or repetitions, I want you to add this drill, for example. So you're sitting there resting anyway. While you're doing that, just apply this drill. So easily applied in that sense. We're not trying to change your program completely. We're not trying to add any time. We're just giving you these recommendations that you can apply in that way. And certainly this first one, just saying, hey, hold your setup position for 2 or 3 seconds before you go, as opposed to getting, rushing, getting in and out of it very, very quickly, which many athletes do. And what that's going to do is, one, it's going to add to the strengthening of that specific position. Any position that you pause in or hold in is going to add to the strengthening, and it's going to add to the learning process. It's going to give you that opportunity to make an adjustment if you need to. Again, are my feet centered? Is the bar touching my shin? Yes, I feel both of those things. Now, do I feel like my shoulders are on top of the bar? And that last one is a little bit tricky because it's hard to know if you're to feel and to be aware that of you being in the right spot. So you're going to need to take some videos or pictures of that specific aspect and make sure that you're getting the shoulders on top of the bar the way that I want consistently. And once you learn what that feels like, again, holding your start position specifically in the snatch, you'll be able to find that. You'll say, okay, this is what it feels like to have my shoulders on top. Okay, I've got it. Now I can ease from the ground. But when I say setup position, also, I'm not talking about just start position from the floor in the snatch. I'm talking about if you're doing a snatch from the hip, I want you to move slowly into that setup position and hold that setup position. So you're going to be you're going to be set up with your knees bent to dip down to set up for a hip snatch. And again, take your time, hold that for 2 or 3 seconds, and then you can go. Is it harder to do hip snatches with moving slowly into that dip position and holding it? Initially, it is for people. It makes it harder. It makes them not able to lift as much weight. But I promise you, if you keep doing it, for me, I can lift more from a pause position in the setup at the hip, or more from a pause position when I'm setting up at the knee, or any other position in the pull by pausing briefly, because it ensures solidity, and it ensures that I'm setting up and I have that position exactly the perfect way that I want it. And that's going to allow me to move better, more consistently, more effectively, more efficiently from those positions. So saying on this first easily applied tip, hold your setup position, means any setup position that you get into from any position that you're setting up in, a back squat, a front squat, an overhead squat, a snatch grip push press, making sure that that all of the basics are being accomplished, that you're not just taking out of the rack, taking a few quick steps back, and before you even have your feet set, you're already dipping very fast and going from there. Taking your time, holding those positions.
Yeah, so I think it actually falls in really well with something that I recommend a ton with gymnastics movements, is that every skill that we do has a very distinct start and finish. And I think people end up having a tendency to focus completely on like what's happening in the middle, and they forget what the beginning is supposed to look like, and they forget what the end is supposed to look like. So we always try to stress distinct start, distinct finish. What happens in the middle is part of the movement, not the only piece. So an example, a muscle up on rings, if you're doing a kipping muscle up or for an uprise, how you jump to the rings, how you still yourself, how you finish in support and come down from the rings are all parts of the movement, not just the swing and the pull and the finishing and the catch and the pressing out and support. It's all of these things from the beginning and the end. I think that's kind of what you're stating with this holding of the set position. It's mimicking the same type of a comment. Now, the last thing I just want to finish up with this first point is, you said 2 to 3 seconds. Is that what you recommend? 2 to 3 second hold, and then you can kind of move in through the movement?
Yeah, and it depends on the person. I think in general, again, I'm going to go back and talking about the elites real quick here. What do they do? Am I saying this just for people to learn, just to get them more consistent? Yes, I am. But I'm also saying I feel like that's how most athletes are going to lift the most weight. We just don't see a whole lot, or I just don't see a whole lot of dynamic start positions. And what that means is that someone is moving in and out of their start position quickly and immediately, and they're doing that for stimulation. But in general, I would say that they're holding that setup position for at least a few seconds. And then, so maybe they're really, really close to it. All the angles are where they need to be. They just haven't completely engaged. And then they completely engage, hold briefly, and go from there. But yeah, in general, that's about 2 seconds or so, depending on the person that I'm working with and what I feel that they need. For example, if I'm saying 2 seconds and they're doing a half a second, I may say 5 seconds just to slow them down a little bit more. But in general, you have to remember to count slowly. How fast is someone counting? Is it 1, 2, or is it 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, which is closer to what it needs to be? It needs to be a very controlled count. And yes, that can take some focus away from what you're trying to feel, but that's what it's going to have to be initially to get you slowed down to the speed that we need, or to that hold time that we need.
All right, so we don't need any Happy Gilmore lifters. No running up to the
oh man,
with a running golf swing. No running up to the bar and just starting to pull from the ground. Take your time.
It just doesn't seem to work in that way for sure. And you know what you talked about, I wanted to go back to what you talked about, the middle part of the lift. People are focused on you know, perfecting and doing what they need to do in the middle of the movement. Well, the thing is that if you are, and I agree with you, Dave, that there is some attempts at doing certain things in middle parts of the movement. But what happens if you're rushing in and out of your start position, you have less of an opportunity to make those changes or to do the things that you want in the middle of the lift. And basically what's happening is that you're playing catch up the whole time. You're already like, you're so fast in and out of your start position that you're trying to apply something at the knee, for example, and you're already at the hip. You're way behind because you didn't take your time enough. You didn't set up appropriately. And another example of setting up too quickly, I've had a few athletes before who they would never even get their grip right. Their grip was always offset because they were grabbing the bar so quickly and immediately lifting it. And, you know, so I had to do two things. I had to, you know, get them to understand that they needed to slow down and to slow down enough to just simply be consistent with grip, stance, or whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you ready to go on to point number 2? You feeling good about that?
Man, I think so. And what we can do is just take it on up a little bit higher into the lift. And what we were talking about, focusing on the middle part of the movement. So now I'm going to say, I want you to pause within your pull somewhere. Okay. So in general, what I do for my lifts, again, I apply these tips to my training as well. Anytime I snatch, for example, I'm pausing for 2 or 3 seconds above the knee. So right there at what we've defined as a critical transition point within the pull of the snatch and the clean. But I'm getting in my start position. I'm easing from the ground, moving even a little slower than I normally would. I'm going to stop with the bar at the level of touching the top of the kneecap. I'm going to hold that for a few seconds, and then I'm going to snatch from there. And for this tip specifically, the protocol that I give is I want you to pause above the knee for the first 1 to 2 reps of any warm-up set up to about 70%. So for me, I apply this on the first rep of any set that I do up to about 70%, and then I move on about my business from there. Again, the general recommendation is above the knee because that is a critical transition point. It's going to be one that's going to be beneficial to anyone to help, again, maintain that position if you're already good there, but also to help make change if you need to make change. For example, if your toes are lifting right around that level, then you can pause in that position, make sure that your toes are down, hold it, and then ease from that position from there. But sometimes on an individual basis, depending on what the athlete is doing, for example, if they are still rushing out of their start position, if they are losing tension and position through the first inch or 2 from the ground, then I'm going to change that pause position to an inch or 2 from the ground instead of the knee, just to help them fix the part of the lift that they're struggling with the most, or the most beginning part of the lift. There's no sense in me trying to perfect your above knee position and solidify that further within the lift as a whole if you're already losing tension and position from the ground. And if you're losing tension and position from the ground, that is probably the base of why you're not getting into a good position at the knee, right? So I would change that in that regard. Another position I would change it to is I would say, I want you to do a slow snatch deadlift all the way up to the hip to where you're in a hip position where your knees are still bent. Stop there. That's your pause position in the pull, and then snatch from there. The reason I would give that is if someone is continuing to not find the contact that I want, specifically right in the middle of the pubic bone as I defined earlier, even if they pause at the knee, even if they pause an inch from the ground, they're just not aware enough of that specific action within the lift. I will have them pause at the hip, stop, hold it. Do you feel contact with the bar in your hip? Yes. And then just think about being aware of the bar leaving that specific contact point from there. So to wrap this one up, and I think we can, unless you have any specific questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a question real quick.
Yeah. So, but to wrap that up, in general, the recommendation is pausing above the knee. That's always going to be a critical position that you need to strengthen as much as possible. I like to relate this to the bottom position of your squat. And I've talked too much about that through many episodes, and the importance of pausing in the bottom of your squat. And I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit more on the next point here. But we want to be so capable and aware and strong in the bottom of the squat that we can breathe and speak freely and still maintain a good quality position with heavy weight. I want you to be able to breathe and speak freely with the bar above the kneecap with well over 100% of what you can snatch. That's how aware, that's how strong you need to be within that position. But again, on an individual basis, we can lower that a little bit, or we can raise that specific point a little bit if we need to, depending on what the athlete is doing.
Those are all really great points. So just to reiterate, you gave 3 specific pause points with the pull. You gave above the knee as kind of the top priority. You gave 1 to 2 inches above the ground, kind of setup position. Can you keep that intact before you think about doing anything past that point? And then you gave full stand into the hip crease, understanding kind of where the contact point is into that pubic bone prior to actually taking bar overhead. You mentioned that above the knee is kind of priority number 1. Would you go from the ground up from there? Would you say that it varies individually as to where the issues can come from, bottom point or in hip crease? Is there a priority list there? Is it above the knee number 1 and the other 2 can kind of switch depending on an individual?
Yeah. I think priority wise, it's going to be what the individual needs. But as far as the above knee point, that's going to be general maintenance for everyone, and that's going to be the go-to recommendation that I'm going to give to everyone. And from that, we can kind of see if I'm working with them on an individual basis, we can go from there and see where they're at and make that change at that point. Or if you're someone that knows that you always miss contact and you can't make that change, or someone that you know that you always rush from the floor, you lose tension in your back or your hips shoot up, well, that's where that pause an inch or 2 from the ground is going to come in handy. I use that a lot with athletes that I can't say anything, can't give them a cue, I can't give them enough of a heart-to-heart or whatever needs to happen to slow them down enough from the floor. So I say, okay, well, then let's pause an inch from the ground. Mm-hmm. And I've done that a couple times where athletes were lifting heavy, and one in particular, he was going for a PR, and he got to this weight, and so he had been maintaining movement and control from the ground up to that point, and he just got into his head a little bit too much, and he kept rushing from the floor. So I said, okay, on this next rep, I know you've got heavy weight on there. Don't worry about that. I want you to pause an inch from the ground, and let's just see what happens. To my surprise, quite honestly, he made it. And again, it was a PR lift, but he made it because he maintained such a better position. At that specific spot, an inch or 2 from the ground, he was solid. The bar was up against his body. Everything was good, and it allowed him to go through the rest of the lift in a better way.
Excellent. All right, why don't we move on to point number 3, pausing in another position.
Yep, the other position here is in the bottom of your overhead squat. Okay, and the way that I apply this is, for me, for example, I will do 1 power snatch. And again, if I'm warming up, you guys know that I pause at the knee on the first rep. So I'm going to pause above the knee. I'm going to do a power snatch, stand up, and then I'm going to do an overhead squat with a 5 to 10 second pause, stand up, dump it, and then I'm going to do a regular snatch with no tricks. No tricks means I'm not pausing at the knee, and I'm not doing a power snatch. I'm doing a squat snatch. For a lot of athletes, I'll make that first snatch a squat snatch and not a power, but it just depends on where you're at and what you need. For me, I'm probably slightly weak in comparison to my power snatch is slightly weak compared to what my snatch is. So that's why I would add that power snatch in there as opposed to just doing a squat snatch. But what this overhead squat rep does for me, one, is it just reminds my body of where I want it to go, what foot position I want to be using, what depth I want to get to. Gives me extra overhead squat repetitions. I think in general, people don't do enough overhead squats. And in fact, for me, with the way that I train right now, only training 3 days a week usually, and only snatching very rarely, it gives me the only overhead squat reps I get, for example. I think that athletes should be doing other overhead squats beyond this, another overhead squat, but it's one way that, again, if your program doesn't call for overhead squats, you can get these overhead squats in, and you can let them accumulate over time by simply doing an overhead squat within your snatches, kind of as a complex, just as you're warming up. Again, for any sets that you perform up to about 70%, as you get better and more comfortable and able to do it, then of course you can go up and weight a little bit on it. And I recommend that you do so. At least maybe the goal is up to about 80%. And again, with the lighter sets, you're going to go 10 seconds in the bottom. Once you get up a little bit heavier, then you can cut that in half. But it just gives you that opportunity. And for me, it's about maintenance. But for a lot of athletes, it's about helping their mobility, helping them get to as low of a position as they can get to within the reception of their snatch, help keep them from jumping their feet out so wide and compensating in that way. There's so many things that go on the reception of a snatch that are compensations that are not what we desire, that you can help by doing an overhead squat and then immediately going into a snatch. You've showed your body right before you go into the snatch exactly what you want it to do. Now, is it going to fix 100% of your issues immediately? No, but it's about an accumulation of reps. It's about extra repetition and time in the bottom of a squat with the bar overhead.
So the recommendation is more the application of this pause in the overhead squat into your daily training as you've been doing it. So just to reiterate again, you have 2 pauses in every first rep that you have up to 70%. The first pause would be above the knee, 2 to 3 seconds. Then you do power snatch overhead for you, being an area that you need to work on. Then you'll do an overhead squat and hold for up to 10 seconds with lighter weight.
Correct.
Coming down to closer to 5 seconds as you get up closer to that 70%. Stand up from there and then dump the weight. That's your first rep normally as you're building up. Okay.
Absolutely. And let me add to that, Dave. In a way, I'll say I have 3 pauses because I'm pausing in my start position as well.
Right.
Now, it doesn't have to be considered a pause because that's just my normal setup routine. That's my normal setup rhythm. But for a lot of athletes that are so quick in and out of that need to make a change, they're probably going to have to consider it being 3 pauses. I'm going to have to pause in my start position. I'm going to pause above the knee or whatever position in the pull that is going to be most beneficial to me. And then I'm going to pause in the bottom of an overhead squat rep that I'm going to do in between those snatch reps.
Mm-hmm. Now, really quickly, and I know this is another little tangent that could take us a few minutes maybe in the wrong direction, but just with overhead position in general, can you talk a little bit about grip width in terms of what you deem to be optimal? Is it okay to go a little bit more narrow if you have the mobility and stability to be able to go a little bit more narrow? What are the advantages of going a little bit more narrow? What are your recommendations with that overhead position in terms of hand position?
I think if we say narrow, different people are going to define that differently. I'm going to say narrow is anything more narrow than the bar touching the middle of your pubic bone when you're holding the bar in a standing position, right? So I want your shoulders to be relaxed down. I want your arms to be straight and twisted in, as we talked about earlier. And in that standing position, I want the bar to be resting in the middle of the pubic bone. If it's resting lower than that, then your grip is narrow. It's too narrow. If it's above that, then your grip is too wide and you need to adjust. And most athletes are going to be able to do that and find the grip width for their snatch in that way and use that. Some athletes, their arms are too long or their limb length proportions are such that there's not enough bar for them to get wide enough, for example, or whatever that may be. But for a snatch specifically, in the way that I want you performing these overhead squats, it's going to be dead on for most people to where their grip needs to be for the most effective and efficient contact point within the snatch. Is it okay to do narrow grip overhead squats? Again, narrow meaning anything more narrow than that specific grip, in as much as maybe your jerk grip. Yeah, it's absolutely beneficial because it requires more mobility, and therefore it's going to help you work and develop more mobility or maintain more overhead mobility in that regard. And I tell people all the time, Dave, I am way too lazy to do overhead squats, any amount of overhead squats in a CrossFit workout with my snatch grip. It's just it's a disadvantaged position. I'm strong in that position, but it's not one that I want to hold for a long period of time and perform a lot of even lightweight reps within a WOD, right? It's going to consume much more of my energy than bringing my hands into my jerk grip, for example, and just getting those reps. And just like for you, Dave, you would probably benefit be most effective and efficient in a CrossFit workout by using your handstand with the bar overhead, right? I think that's just where you're strongest. that's where you'd be able to sustain the longest and perform the best.
That's super interesting. So just if I'm hearing that correctly, you would change your overhead position in a CrossFit type workout, high volume, high rep situation, to a more narrow grip because it's something you can sustain for longer periods of time, as opposed to a 1 rep snatch type scenario, heavier weight, a little bit wider grip hitting that pubic bone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just a little side note here, strength wise, it's a significant difference for me, for example, and for a lot of athletes too. Again, we want to make the snatch grip with the bar overhead as strong as we possibly can. That's why I said there's got to be an accumulation of reps, and people need to be doing more overhead squatting in general. And depending on how prepared you are overhead with the snatch grip, maybe all of that needs to be with the snatch grip. I have athletes that are just not comfortable there, and they aren't as strong as they need to be. So if they're also doing CrossFit, I say, you know what, even though you're capable of a more narrow grip, I want you to do these with a snatch grip just to get more repetitions in.
Mm-hmm.
But when I would do most of the overhead squat reps that I did in my training back in the day, Dave, were with a jerk grip. I could jerk grip overhead squat. I think my best was probably somewhere around 180 with a pause in the bottom. That's right at 400 pounds. And my best overhead squat with the snatch grip was probably somewhere around 150 kilos or a little bit more. So that's 330, 340. So there's quite a significant difference in my ability to do an overhead squat with those different grips.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty significant. Your overhead position is just so solid. I mean, upper back, your soft tissue of the underarm, all the things that we see as limiting factors in terms of being able to get to, whether that's a handstand position or a good swing mechanic, you're just naturally very, very solid there. Do you see those things? Would you recommend the person who's really limited in that overhead position to just go as close as they can with the hands with some of these more accessory work where they can keep the position intact, as opposed to just going towards their clean grip and then affecting maybe the rest of the position?
Yeah, great point. What I do with a lot of athletes, Dave, let's say, so on the extreme side where they're even struggling with the snatch grip mobility wise, like they need work on mobility, and they can't even really maintain the position that I want there. Or if I bring their hands in even as little as an inch, they look like a completely different athlete, for example. What we want to do with them is pull out some tricks, and I'll do different progressions with them. For example, I'll have them do overhead squats with their heels elevated with their snatch grip. And then I'll leave that same high elevation that we start out with and try to progress their hands in slightly as we go through different sets. And so I'll mess with the amount that their hands, the width of their hands, and I'll mess with the amount we're elevating their heels. And in between those sets, I'll do whatever mobility drill is most meaningful to them to really help them make the changes that they need to make. So we can manipulate a lot of different variables there to help them make the change that we need, to help them solidify those positions. One, get the mobility that we need and awareness of the position, and then ultimately solidify them. And you said mine is so solid, and some of that was natural, yes, Dave, but the base of that natural ability came with the mobility that I had that I never lost because I was, from a young age, I was putting a bar overhead.
Yeah.
So I didn't do an excessive amount of bench pressing, for example, where I locked that up, but it's as solid as it is because I was doing so many of these easily applied tips that I'm telling you about here. I was doing overhead squats, for example, in my snatch warm-ups. I was doing at least one other overhead position work, like again, narrow grip overhead squats. I was doing regularly overhead quarter squats, where that's me just simply standing up with the weight from a power rack that's set, the bar set at about forehead height, doing say 3 to 5 repetitions, and then holding that overhead position for 10 to 20 seconds with well above what I'm capable of jerking, and certainly well above what I'm capable of snatching. And so it's as solid as it is because I was always exaggerating that position, holding that position, overloading that position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, don't diminish the work that it takes to get there too, just because you see the end result. So I apologize if I made it seem like it was just natural ability and not the
No,
work that you put in.
No, I thought it was a great point because it goes along with exactly what we're talking about here. There, you're going to have to find those repetitions somewhere. And what I'm saying to you is that I know that a lot of you are on a program. You're on a program probably from someone that you trust. So I'm not saying that you have to completely change your program. I'm just saying you can accumulate these times and reps and holds that you need by applying these tips. And that's, certainly one way that you can do it.
Yep, totally. You want to move on to number 4?
Yeah, let's do it for sure. The number 4 is now holding your completion position of any exercise that you perform where you need it. For example, at the end of your snatch, and when you're in the standing position, holding it there, or a snatch grip push press as an assistant exercise, for example. And we could give many other examples on cleans, clean deadlifts, snatch deadlifts, squats, even. And this goes along really with what I was talking about, Dave, with that overhead quarter squat and hold. That was an extra assistant exercise that I did a lot of that helped take this to another level. But again, one way that you can do this without having to add overhead quarter squats in is, say, on your last 3 to 5 sets of any snatches that you perform. So previously we've talked about applying other drills to your warm-up sets. What I'm saying that you want to do this one specifically on is your last heaviest 3 to 5 reps or sets of any snatches that you perform. So for example, if I know that I've warmed up and these are going to be my last 3 heavy snatches for the day, let's say for the day, I've gone up to 90% and I'm doing 5 singles at 90%. I'll do the first 2 reps, separate them, rest as needed. I'll go to my 3rd rep, I'll snatch it, and I know on that one that I'm going to hold in the standing position for 10 or 15 seconds. It's not comfortable. It sucks a little bit, of course, until you get used to it and you'll be able to do it a little bit more comfortably. But that load is always going to be bearing down on you. You're always probably going to want to put it down before it's time for you to put it down. And if it gets to the point to where you're extremely comfortable with it, great, add time, right? Or add overhead quarter squats at that point where you can really overload it to a higher level, to a higher percentage of what you're snatching, to a higher percentage of what you're jerking. But I'll do that same thing on those final 2 reps as well. So this is now saying on your final 3 to 5 repetitions or sets of any snatches that you perform, you know that you're going to hold in that standing position for 3 to 5 seconds. Again, this is an accumulation exercise. You want to accumulate time in this end result position. And what happens when you do this, especially if you're holding it appropriately, you're reinforcing the ideal overhead position that we want. You're reinforcing the ideal stacked body position that we teach for handstands and overhead position in Power Monkey.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get so much stronger in that position. If you're a competitive weightlifter, for example, you're going to have no problem saving a lift, for example, that might be slightly off because you're so strong in that in position. You're going to have no problem holding it for however long you need to get the down signal. It was never an issue for me. In fact, there have been many times in my career where I wasn't sure that I got the down signal. So I sat there and held it for 5 extra seconds just to make sure. And it was no problem, problem whatsoever. And what this also means is that the stronger you are at that end result position, the more comfortable you are, the more ownership you have of that position. And ownership means that you can breathe and speak freely. The less hesitation you're going to have in your body, in your movement, getting to that point. If you're extremely uncomfortable, if you're extremely compensated in your standing position, or let's say in the bottom of your squat, there's going to be hesitation in your movement getting to that point, if that makes any sense. And I wonder, Dave, if you have an example in that regard for gymnastics movements, say a handstand or a handstand push-up, for example, or a handstand position. If they're uncomfortable there, what is that going to mean for their movement getting into that position?
Yeah, and I think this is such a great point. I think it brings back to what I was mentioning earlier when we talked about point number 1, the hold setup, with regards to distinct start and finish. Now we're talking about the finish and not moving out of whatever skill you're doing until you fully grasp what's happening at the end of it. And I mean, you're talking about a comparison to the gymnastics world, and I'll take it back to the muscle up again because I think this one applies really well. Mm-hmm. Finishing in the support and holding your support when you get above the rings. And the reason why I find this to be a good kind of comparison is because most people support are really off. Most
Hmm.
people's ring support, they haven't done enough time static holds with their support, understanding where the shoulder needs to be placed, where the hands, where the elbows, the external rotation happens through the arm for a good support position. So when they get to the top of the rings, the elbow might be slightly bent. The rings are straps are up against the forearms. There's a lot of poor position that happens when someone thinks that they're done with the rep because they move through it so quickly. If you can pause within that support, understand what that support is supposed to look like, not only are you going to understand the distinct finish position, but it's also going to build some strength and stability there to be able to apply it to other movements. So for me, I see a lot of similarities specifically with that end position and support with what you're talking about with that holding of the bar and overhead as a completion.
Absolutely. So important. And one there that, I mean, all these really, I think are overlooked or just not even considered. And again, I want to go back to the phrase easily applied tips. It's about being able to do this without having to add any extra time and allowing these repetitions in this time to accumulate. Just think of, you know, anytime you do ring dips or muscle ups, if someone held that in position for their last 3 to 5 sets, I mean, how meaningful would that be? Now, to be honest, Dave, do people do enough ring dips and muscle ups to really accumulate the time that they need? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. They probably, if they want to make a change and get better at the muscle ups or ring
The people
dips
that I
or
program for do.
well, right, but in general, I mean, how often do they do that? It's to me, it's just
Right.
like overhead squats. You're not getting enough overhead position and overhead squat work to really make the changes that we need. So just kind of taking this on a side note real quick, if you want to be better at muscle ups or dips, well, you probably need to be doing them at least twice a week, and then you can apply these easily applied tips to that as well. Would you agree, Dave?
Absolutely, and I think general point here that we've talked about endlessly, and I think most people probably know from our conversations in the past is that working on a specific skill means breaking it down into its finer components as much as possible. Every skill is a big puzzle, and your goal is to figure out where within that puzzle you need to be spending the most time
Yeah.
and to be able to perfect it, not just doing that movement, that completed movement over and over and over again. Right? I really despise the mentality of I'm weak at a muscle up and weak at a snatch. Let me just keep doing muscle up and snatches
Right.
until I figure it out. Well, if you have no comprehension of what your setup position is supposed to look like, or what your pause position with the pull above the knee is supposed to feel
Yeah.
like, or where that pubic bone is in contact with the bar, there's no way that you're going to be able to do it with speed and with a dynamic action and going through it with heavier weights. So it is all about breaking things down and hopefully understanding that the pause and the tempo and the slow pieces are so critical once you actually start to apply it with speed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good transition into the fifth point here that we're going to talk about, or the fifth easily applied tip. And it's talking about someone that maybe they are applying all of these things and they're in the process of working and making change, but still when they do regular snatches, for example, they're compensating in some way that may be due to mobility or lack of awareness or strength in any of these key positions. So what we can do on top of helping them focus better, teaching them how to focus through the lift and feel certain things, and in combination with these drills or with these pause positions, is we can add in drills in between sets. Okay, this is a very powerful concept, something that I use on a daily basis with myself when I'm doing my general warm-ups with anyone that I program for. They're going to see a lot of this stuff in general, just because it's maintenance for them, if not development and change. But what I might do, for example, is my right ankle is quite a bit tighter than my left. It is and it always will be. But if I warm it up appropriately, I can get more range out of it. I can get into better positions. And so while I'm applying what we talked about earlier, Dave, the pause above the knee, doing a power snatch, doing an overhead squat, and then doing another regular snatch, between my first 3 to 5 warm-up sets, I might do some extra ankle mobility work. That's just going to help me get into a better overhead squat position when I'm applying that pause, and then obviously react in a better way and receive better in that ultimate snatch that I'm going to be performing after the overhead squat, or after the power snatch, after the overhead squat. Sometimes I'll also do some extra just general overhead warm-up exercise in between my first 3 to 5 sets if I'm just feeling a little bit out of the ordinary tight. So just, whatever that may be. Usually for me, it's this drill that I call a behind the neck press and stretch. and I would use a more narrow grip for that, just because, again, it requires more mobility to have the bar overhead with a more narrow grip. So I'll press with my jerk grip, or as I go through sets, I'll bring it in even more narrow, but I'll press straight up and hold it. And then I'll push the bar back as far as I can and hold it with that tight, straight body position, which engages the stretch better. But just going through a few sets of that will usually wake my body up and really allow me to get into that overhead squat position and receive the bar better and more comfortably as I do that. That's a common one that I'll give people as well. A few other examples that I'll give to kind of solidify this point that I find myself giving pretty regularly are contact drills. So again, if someone is snatching, even if they're pausing above the knee and they're still missing that contact point, or if they're stopping at the hip, like I talked about earlier, and they're snatching from there and they're trying to create that awareness. Along with that, between sets, I'll just have them get into a standing position and just pull the bar out slightly and kind of let it fall back into their hip, and just get more aware of what that feels like for the bar to touch their body, get more comfortable with that. A lot of athletes aren't comfortable with the bar contacting. There's always hesitation there. So we need some time and repetition in getting them comfortable with it and getting them aware and giving their body the chance to be okay with the bar touching their body. Another common one is an early arm bend. So some athletes will purposely lift with an arm bend. I don't want to get too much into that. There are some world records that are broken with an early arm bend, so I'm not going to say it's completely detrimental or not usable, but most people are going to lift most effectively and lift their most weight with a straight arm. So if you always have that early arm bend in there and we can't get it to change within the lift or from pausing in certain positions, then in between sets, I might give you a jumping drill. So for example, I'd have you set up in the hip position or set up above the knee and just move very slowly into extension with a little slow, unaggressive hop, emphasizing keeping those arms locked and straight. I'm giving these my kind of go-to drills, but what I want you to remember is we're basically trying to be creative in the drills that we're giving or the drills that we're using to help someone move more in the way that we want. So it could be anything. Honestly, I hope people have the confidence to experiment. I'm always experimenting with different drills and different ways to get people to do the things that I want. So that it doesn't, what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be these specific drills. You don't even have to understand what I'm explaining to you right now, as long as you understand that the point is to offset the faults that they're performing in some way with a drill between sets. And what that does is that you apply the drill and you don't rest, you immediately go into that snatch, right? So you're applying this specific drill that on the area of the lift that you need to work on, dropping that empty bar or whatever other device that you're using for the drill, and then you go right into your regular snatch rep, and that's going to give you a better opportunity to make the change and really apply the drill there. All right.
Yeah, I love this. So, did you do these types of drill in between sets when you were actually training, or is this something that you slowly started to implement later in your career?
Yeah, it's definitely slowly started to implement later in my career and more so as a coach. I would say there were times where I would do, say, those overhead quarter holds in between some of my jerk sets, or heavy front quarter holds in between clean and jerks or squats. But that was, I can't think of any other times where I really used it in my training other than that. And my purpose in that at that time was getting the benefit of overloading. So overloading those positions and making my the lift that I was trying to perform feel easier.
Sure.
And help strengthen in that way. And so it's really the same concept, usually just for a different purpose, and that purpose being changing their movement or allowing them to get into some of these key positions easier if they're tight in certain areas.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious, you probably know whether or not athletes these days are using this type of technique, but if you could redo it and do things over again, would you find this to be something that you would utilize more often and to be beneficial as you were an athlete still in competition, still kind of going towards your peak? Would you utilize this technique a little bit more if you had the ability to do it over again?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I would do is I would just assess myself just to make sure because I had an assumption that I mean, I knew my right ankle was a lot tighter, but I had an assumption that everything else was good. And I think it was because I was able to move well. I had good overall mobility. I stayed relatively injury free. So that leads me to believe that I was balanced and pretty good overall. But I would, if I could go back and do it again, I would give myself a complete mobility assessment, a complete, muscle activation assessment and stuff like that to make sure that I was appropriately strong in all the right places and everything else. Just to see if there's anything that I could do. One of the things that I know I would do is I would have, even though I worked on my ankle mobility a lot, every single day that I trained, I would do it differently. I would do it with this method in mind, meaning that I would do 2 or 3 sets of an ankle mobility drill and immediately go into a squat after that. That's something that I didn't do in my training, and any athlete that I program for, they're doing that every single day in their general warm-ups. So that's definitely something I would do a lot more of.
Mm. So I think it would be really helpful for some people to get a visual on some of these drills that you're recommending. I know you said like it's not so important the drill that you're talking about, more important to kind of implement something. But is there some place where people can go to see some of these drills? What's the best route so that people can actually see what you're talking about?
Yeah, I really think at this point the best thing that we could do, Dave, is maybe we could attach a link to the description section
Hmm.
that is maybe pointing to one of my blogs with what I'm talking about specifically on general warm up, general squat warm up, where there's a squat variation and then a mobility drill, squat variation, mobility, and it goes back and forth in that way. And then what we could do also is potentially create something where we could send them to a link or even put it in the description of just a sample of, honestly, maybe even an entire snatch warm up, right? So
Hmm.
where they're applying the hold in the setup, they're applying the pause at the knee, they're applying the pause in the overhead squat, and in between sets, they're doing a mobility drill, and just put out a sample in that way.
Yeah, I think it would be great. These are awesome. I think these are really great, useful, easily applied, as you mentioned initially for the snatch. I can't wait to apply some of these into my non-existent snatch next time I get a barbell in hand. But is there anything that you want to finish up with?
No, I think that's it, Dave. I mean, hopefully all this made sense, and you guys can apply these moving forward. What I would recommend is, above all else, just slow down in any and every way that you can think of. And then what I would recommend, if you're going to apply these drills, is start with one and then add to that protocol as you go over time. So maybe you apply one for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then if you feel comfortable, you've got that in your routine, then move to the next one, and start with the one that's at the very beginning. Start, if you're not holding your setup position, then do that, and then apply that for 2 or 3 weeks, and then start pausing at the knee. Apply that
Love
for
it.
2 to 3 weeks, and then add that overhead squat. And just so you're not overthinking, you're not adding too many things to your general training or protocol at once, but you're going to have a much better opportunity and chance to make these things routine and to benefit from them if you add one at a time.
Love it. So we're coming towards the end here. I just want to make a quick little note and mention that by the time you're listening to this, our Power Monkey Camp Online has been released. Something we're very, very proud of. It's basically all of the content that you would get as a Power Monkey camper in person, but it's a digital version. There's a test involved with every station. So Chad, your station with mobility drills for lifting, as well as
Mm-hmm.
the other 3 lifting stations, are all in there with our amazing coaching staff. Every station that we have at camp is a full-on learning experience, digital perspective, tests, certified with CrossFit, NASM, and AFAA. I would highly recommend checking it out now that it's available in the new year. So go ahead and check out that through the Power Monkey website, and hopefully you guys will be able to find that pretty useful. And then maybe we'll even get you out to camp in person sometime in the new year.
Absolutely, Dave. As you were just saying that, I got chills. I mean, it's so exciting, this product that we've been able to put together, and I think it's going to be so beneficial and helpful for so many athletes, and especially with everything going on. Hopefully the in-person events will ramp back up and everything will be back to normal or somewhat normal at some point. But whether they are or they aren't, this is something that's going to be available and beneficial to many athletes, many people out there that, maybe you're not quite able to ever make it to camp, but certainly we hope you can. And whether you can or you can't, please use this incredible service that's available to you all. And once again, you can check out Power Monkey Fitness to see that and other services and upcoming events. Also, guys, check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. Until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.
Thank you, everybody. I want to mention that the website is actually academy.powermonkeyfitness.com for the Power Monkey Camp Online. Go ahead and check it out there. We'll see you next time.